What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 487. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you recovered from your Mythic Invitational experience?
Yeah, I certainly am. Just getting back in the swing of things. Though I think you might have made a mistake. I think this is episode 486.
No way. Did you get me? Did you seriously? You did. God dang it. You did this one other time when I caught you, and you finally got me.
Yeah.
He literally changed the show notes. I always check this, too. I can't believe you snuck this one by. God dang it. All right. You win this round. This is episode 46, apparently.
Yeah, I went back and changed the number on the last like 4 episodes because I knew you'd scroll back down.
That is unbelievable.
But I don't have it in me to like let it just go uncorrected, and you get deluged by worried listeners who are like, "Did I miss an episode?"
Yeah, because that's exactly what happened. You get lit up on Twitter by people going, "What the Phantom episode?" So yeah, getting back in the swing, we had our post-PAX breakdown, but we were both in kind of a stupor, at that point. Now we've actually had a chance to get back home and actually get a little bit of sleep in between, and we're ready to hit the ground running here. We've got one last show before we start transitioning over or away from Ravnica Allegiance. Next show, we're going to be doing the Sunset show for it. But we thought we'd take a little bit of the quiet time in between here to check in on some of the older and really important level up and kind of fundamentals topics that we like to talk about. And then also we wanted to touch back in on Arena because Arena has changed around a little bit and we haven't had a chance to chat about it. Had a little bit of a few updates on that as well. Before we get to that, though, got to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Premium content. That's the place to go if you want the absolute best. Channelfireball.com, otherwise known as store.channelfireball.com/landing, is the place to go. You can pre-order War of the Spark right now. It looks like they got booster cases. You got bundles, boxes, all types of stuff on the site. And you know how that works when you go to pre-order. Any of the sets on Channel Fireball, once they are able to ship it, they have a strict date where they can't ship it out to you until a certain date. But once they can, boom, it's on the truck and it'll be on its way to you as quickly as they can possibly get it to you. Of course, they always stand by their product. Just a few of the many reasons we love Channel Fireball. Make sure you check them out. Also, the Patreon. You can support us directly. This is where our most dedicated and interactive fans come and support the shows. Patreon.com/limited resources. And somewhat related to that, I have a playmat here. This playmat is going to go, actually, this playmat's going to take quite a journey around the world. This one's going to go all the way to Gosford, New South Wales, Australia, to the home of Nicholas Hobday. Thank you, Nicholas. This is actually the one Rattleclaw Mystic playmat, which is really good looking playmat, by the way. And it was from GPLA. Looks like it was in 2014. Oh boy. That's actually pretty old now. A vintage playmat will be sent. Thank you, Nicholas, for that. And then also, I've got a box of Crack-A-Pack cards here that's looks like it's about ready to go. Let's see what we actually have in here. We got a Simic Ascendancy, a Dovin. That's pretty cool. Sphinx of Foresight, Unbreakable Formation, a Lithophage. I don't even know what that is. Foil, some other language, Tajik, a Hollowed Fountain. Yeah, so there's some good stuff.
Quite a random assortment.
It is indeed from a bunch of different Crack-A-Packs. But that is going, well, so actually, the winner of this actually has requested no reward tier, which is one of the things you can do if you just want to say, look, I just want to support you guys, but I don't want anything. That's one of the options you have on Patreon. And it actually went to our friends from Scryfall. So first things first, thank you, Scryfall, for supporting the show. And I have actually mentioned Scryfall a few times on the show since I started using it a few years ago.
Oh, yeah, Scryfall's great.
Yeah, I figured this would be a good time to mention it again, just because it's such a useful tool for Magic players. So Scryfall is the best, in my opinion, Magic card search engine by a lot. I used to use a site called magiccards.info, which was quite good, but they started to get a little bit slow on the updates, and I started to look elsewhere. And right when I did was when Scryfall was starting to hit the pages, and it is a fully featured. And I'll tell you what, if you make any type of Magic content, a website like Scryfall is just completely invaluable. I mean, it's just you need to have it. You can't write articles or do podcasts or do any of this stuff without it. And then also, just if you're a player, if you're brewing up a deck or if you just want to browse around, they have a extensive, I mean, every card ever printed has to be on there at this point. Nice big scans, to grab the artwork if you need it for a graphic or something. Scryfall is just invaluable. So we really do recommend checking them out. I mean, we don't get anything for that. It's just, I like to pass on the tools that I use. And that is definitely the one I use. So thank you, Scryfall. But since you were in the no reward tier, show somebody else.
When you do an ad, you have to do #sponsored, #ad, right?
Oh, right. #ad. Except for I wasn't paid for it, so I do not.
Well, you weren't.
Wait, are you getting paid by Scryfall? You somehow engineered them winning as well. Jonathan Giloni from San Mateo, California. Thank you, Jonathan. This box of cards will be sent off to you shortly. We do appreciate it. Let's do a Crack-A-Pack Ravnica Allegiance. We've only got one more Crack-A-Pack to do after this one of it. And, at this point, we kind of cruise through them because most of our listeners are pretty familiar with the format and what kind of thing you're looking for here. So, first card out is Rubble Slinger, the 2 and a Gruul hybrid for a 2/3 with reach.
I'm still unhappy whenever this gets into my deck.
Same. Impassioned Orator. One and a white 2/2 whenever another creature ETBs gain life on your side.
I thought this card was going to be good. Ended up not being particularly good.
Yeah, it's fine. Humongulous, no. A bigger Humongulous Mammoth Spider, fine, but not.
It's not as good as it was in Dominaria. Let's put it that way.
That is true.
It just happens that the size of creatures and kind of what battles are getting fought lent itself to Mammoth Spider a lot better when Dominaria was the format.
Mm-hmm. Undercity Scavenger, that's the 3 and a black 3/3, but when ETBs, you can sacrifice another creature. If you do, it becomes a 5/5, and you get to scry 2. Card's fine.
Yeah, nothing standing out so far.
No. Sylvan Brush Strider, no. Thirsting Shade, my God, this pack is bad. All right, here's one. Law Mage's Binding.
A fine place to start.
Here we go. Active Treason, no. That brings us to our uncommons. Ooh. Best uncommon in the set? Maybe. Mortify.
Mortify's pretty high up there. I think Consecrate Consumes a little better, but it's kind of immaterial since Mortify is clearly the best card in this pack so far.
Yeah, it's just I like Trollbred Guardian a lot too. By the way.
Yeah, Delicious Trollbred is good. The fact that Mortify kills enchantments a lot more relevant in this set. There's just a lot of good enchantments, including Law Mage's Binding. So I would certainly Mortify over Law Mage's Binding.
Same. Wall of Lost Thoughts. Played that more than I thought I would, but I'm not taking it here. Sentinel's Mark has gone down for me a lot. It's a powerful Magic card. It's just not usually what I want in this color. In either Orzhov or Azoria, Sentinel's Mark isn't really what I need, though you can play one.
I like it in Orzhov aggro, which is not a deck you end up in very often. But when they try to block your Plague White and you just slam the Sentinel's Mark, it's actually pretty good.
It's pretty nasty. We got a foil. It is Scuttlegator. Which I started out by playing actually quite frequently early in the format, and now I never play it. Even though I think it's fine. Our gate is Azorius Guild Gate. Wow.
Oh, well, in that case.
This is the easiest of easy modes, Luis. Here, this is the sound of our pick. Windmill Slam. Ethereal Absolution. I'm sorry, Mortify. You somehow got bumped off by a gold card in your same colors.
Yeah, I think there's a debate as to whether Ethereal Absolution is the best card in the set or not. I think Hydra Crisis is also in the running. Skargan,
I like the Ooze in there too.
Hellkite, Biogenic Ooze, but it doesn't really matter because it's going to be the best card every time you open it, unless you open a foil or something. So Ethereal Absolution, kind of a nuts card. I still remember beating it at the Pro Tour with just a kind of trash tier deck. That is always very satisfying. That
is satisfying, but also extraordinarily difficult to pull off.
Well, when they're at 1 and you're attacking them with a 2/1 Ogre Roustabout or Rakdos Roustabout, it's just
taste it. All right. Well, we're taking Ethereal Absolution. That is total easy mode. One of the best cards in the set. It does feel weird to take it over the Mortify because they're the same pair, but whatever. Easy choice there. Okay, so we've got a few different topics. First thing we wanted to get into was to touch base back on Arena, right? This, of course, Arena, is the new digital offering. And it is just changing everything currently. You and I just got back from the Mythic Invitational where I was doing the broadcast and you were playing in it. And, for a very short period of time, you were playing in it. And by the way, you were not alone. I mean, the people that, if you went 0-2, it's like you played like 3 or 4 games and it was over. It was just like, or 4 or 5, I guess, but it was just super, super fast. Really ruthless format. But I digress. Huge viewership. I mean, they did put $1 million into the prize pool and a lot into the production, but I mean, we had like 150,000 concurrents and just got, a major, major push off of it. I mean, this was a record breaking tournament, and a lot of that is, the way I view it kind of from a big picture perspective is that's Wizards of the Coast placing a very large bet on Arena, right? Yeah. That's them saying like, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We think this product's great.
And even aside from that, if we just look at the way people are playing Magic, irrespective of whether Wizards is pushing it or not, there's a lot of people playing Arena, and we're seeing a lot more people talk to us about Arena. Mm-hmm. When people send us draft questions, they're Arena drafts.
Yep.
And almost universally at this point, I don't remember the last time I got a Magic Online screenshot. So what that means is Arena can breathe life into older formats. Like, look, I don't know why M19 is the ranked format for, currently for Arena. I don't actually think that's a great thing, but that doesn't matter because that's what it is. And as a result, we kind of wanted to check back in on M19, give people a refresher, especially people who maybe have started playing more recently and didn't get a chance to play M19 before.
Yeah. And, we should take a minute as well, Luis, to mention that, Luis and I have talked about this, and this is something that's very, very much on our radar as far as where the show goes, right? Because we have to recognize that Arena is not coming. It's here, right? Like people are playing it now. Like Luis said, we get all the screenshots. Like I play it a bunch. I know you do too, Luis. It has arrived, right? And in order for us to serve our audience the best, we have to incorporate that into the fold. What that doesn't mean is that we're going to bail on live or Magic Online style drafting where you're drafting against human beings. And I still hope that we get those on Arena at some point as well. But the way I see it is that we just work that into the fold. Think of it like us talking about Sealed Deck. Right. We don't necessarily talk about it all the time, but when it's relevant, we bring it up, and sometimes we'll dedicate shows to it when it makes sense to. That's how it'll be with Arena as well. We want Arena players here listening and learning and enjoying the game along with everybody else. And we're not going to take some, hard stance where we say, well, no, we don't talk about Arena on here because it's not the same. We are going to absolutely dive into the metagames on Arena and all that stuff, but we're also still very much going to talk about live drafting and Magic Online drafting against human beings. So to me, it's just an opportunity for more content. It's an opportunity for more listeners, right? Like we hope that we end up being the podcast that you end up with if you start playing Arena and you say, okay, I got used to the interface. I kind of understand how a draft works now. Now I want to get better, right? Now I want to get to that level where I'm a GP level player or a PTQ, end boss level player. That's kind of the meaty core of our audience. So that's what we're going to be doing going forward. So let's talk a little bit about Arena in general. There's one thing that I had a conversation with Ryan Spain from, Going Optimal. We've had him on the show a few times to talk Arena. I'm sure we will again. He had worked out a pretty complicated spreadsheet, and he has a free to play account, right? He put $5 in to start because there's like a big time value bump that you get for the initial, that you get a one-time bump when you first open up an account. And he did that, and he hasn't put a cent into it yet since. And he's had it since he started streaming. So it's been months now. And on average, doing it the way he does, his Going Optimal method or whatever, he's been able to draft about once a day, which I think is really great.
That's a lot for not spending money.
Right. Like, I'm looking at it like, so there was a big thing that happened that we had Ryan on for, which is when they made an economy adjustment, right? Where now when you open up a booster pack, you won't get duplicate. Like once you get 4 of a rare, you won't open that rare anymore. Same thing with mythics. And B, when you get a 5th copy of a card from the booster draft portion. If it's a rare, you'll get 20 gems, which you can use, when they add up and you can use to buy into more drafts, or 40 if it's a mythic. And using his methods of, taking the gems at appropriate times and hitting your daily, what do they call them? Not achievements. What are they? Goals? Whatever. The quests, right? Daily quest. You hit your daily quests and you know when to refresh them to get the 750 gold and all these things. And then you need to play some constructed to build up the gold and everything as well and to hit those quests. But when you do, you can actually draft for about once a day without paying. And if you have money and you want to put a little money in, you can draft way more than that. Now, you do have to get your win percentage up. That's where we come in.
We can help with that.
Yeah. And so there's kind of an equation of things that you need to happen. You need to have a certain win percentage. You need to play smart about which events you enter and when and how and all that. And you need to make sure that you get your daily quests and that you rare draft. That's basically what you're doing when you take the gems is you're rare drafting. You can manage your account to take advantage of it as well. But I was talking to Ryan and I'm like, isn't this just like a big gift for us limited players? Like you can actually draft for about once a day without putting money in. That's insane, right? Now for people like you and I, that's not enough. So we're going to draft. But still, like if you're on a budget, wow, what an insanely great way to enjoy the game. And if you want more information, you can listen to the episodes that we had Ryan on. For specifics, or you can go check out his stream at Going Optimal, twitch.tv/Going Optimal. He streams every weekday at 9. And he talks about this stuff. He shows you, like, he's on the stream saying, okay, look, I'm going to take this rare here because I'll get 20 gems, and that has a better impact on me drafting in the future than the value of like one rare in my deck that I may or may not even get to play. Those are the little edges that if you start taking advantage of, you can get to that, about one draft a day for free.
Yeah, so, I remember.
I think it's sweet.
When I was actually streaming, Ryan came on my stream and we had a discussion because he had been talking about it, which is what is the difference between taking a solid common or solid uncommon versus rare drafting, like a breeding pool when you're Rakdos or whatever. Mm-hmm. And because it's something I've thought about a lot too. It's not that big, actually, because what has to happen is, first of all, you have to draw the card or whatever the replacement card would be for what you didn't take, right? And then it has to be in a game where that would have made a difference. And if you're playing best of 3, that it has to be in a match you would have lost otherwise, or that you end up losing, you didn't win otherwise. Right. So, because we were talking about like if you remember the foil Tarmogoyf Burst Lightning pick.
Oh, I remember.
So we were saying, like, so what if it wasn't a Burst Lightning? What if it was a Comet Storm, the best card in the set? And assuming Tarmogoyf, you're not going to play the foil Tarmogoyf for, again, whatever it is, it's still not worth that much overall just because of how many cards are in your deck and what it looks like when you play a game. So I think I don't tend to rare draft because I don't enjoy it, but if that's what you want to do to optimize like your earn rates, you're not taking a huge hit there.
Yeah. And, I think that the sort of like, if you drill down really deep into that, there's two little hangups that people have when they think, well, of course my deck's way better with this ethereal absolution as a possibility. And the first one is that you don't always get to play the card, right? Especially if it's pack one, pick one. There is a percentage of the time that you won't play it. It's actually not that high, right? Like you and I have talked about that on the show where the people actually do tend to stick to their bomb rares, perhaps mistakenly, but they just do. But there is still a significant percentage of the time that you don't play the card, in which case, it's nothing. And then the other thing is, have you ever heard of war wins above
replacement? It's especially useful when you're looking at what taking a rare versus like a common. And
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, this is the key, right? Is the way, and this, by the way, war is a baseball stat, right? And it effectively is trying to measure how many more wins your team would get, like over the course of the season or whatever, with a player that you have now versus sort of the next player in line that you could hire, right? Which is not necessarily meaning an average player. It just means kind of a player that you could get from the minor leagues or whatever, like today. And in this case for Magic, it's saying, well, a lot of people say, well, of course I want this uncommon that's amazing rather than rare drafting, a Mortify or something like that. Well, what is replacing that Mortify is the question. And it's, let's say it's a Noxious Grudian or something like that, right? Just like a sort of bread and butter C playable or whatever that you could find pretty easily instead of, admittedly a B plus, A minus, whatever level removal spell.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things people get hung up on and why war is a really good way to look at it is this isn't, you're going to rare draft. And so instead of getting a Troll Red Guardian, you're getting nothing. It's right. You're getting whatever the last card you would have cut from your deck is otherwise, which
exactly
in playable rich formats like this is still usually a pretty good card.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that the way that sets are made nowadays, you can get playables very, very late. So that is something that you should keep in mind as well if you are considering. And that's true for all rare drafting. If you're drafting live as well, it does count for that as well. Okay. So we mentioned, so where do we want to start? M19?
Yeah. So one of the things that we wanted to look at, again, because it's the current ranked format, so a lot of people are going to be interested in it, is let's take a look at M19 and also CABS theory while we're at it, because that's also it's funny. We're doing kind of both, where we're revisiting things we've covered, but I think in a way that's useful for people who haven't had a chance to be there for the first time we talked about them, and for people who want a refresher, because when it was like, hey, let's talk about M19, I'm like, okay, I don't even remember a single thing about M19. Let me go back and refresh myself.
Yeah. I did a draft today and I was like, what is this? Oh, okay. And I saw, a few of the gold cards and I remember.
This was just like a couple months ago.
It was a while ago. It came out in 2018, right?
Yeah.
Summer.
So this is like, I don't know.
Over a year ago.
6 months ago. Probably 3 months ago.
Was it really only 6 months ago?
It was after Dominaria. So
my brain just shuffles out the old stuff, man. I don't hold that in there anymore.
Actually, let's start with CABS theory, because
let me preface it. Yeah, because I remember what brought it on, and that really helps set the stage for what it is. And what brought it on is I was going to my local game store, which I do sometimes, and I was looking at the types of decks that people were building. And I wanted to have a way to convey to them a different approach to limited that would help them learn, right? And what they were doing is putting a whole bunch of cards in their deck that didn't do anything, right? That didn't affect the board. So I challenged them and I said, only put cards in your deck that affect the board. And I broke that down into 3 basic categories, which was creatures, removal, and combat tricks. Just things that like affect the here and the now, either kill a creature, is a creature, or makes your creature better, and get rid of all the other stuff. And that was something that I thought, well, we should talk about this on the show because, it just seemed like a useful exercise for people to kind of get back to basics if they've maybe started to get a little too cute with their drafts.
I think that M19 is one of the formats that lends itself well to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's a pretty CABS-y. I mean, there's a few cards, but it's a pretty you can definitely draft CABS and do well.
So what is CABS?
Right. So cards that affect the board state. This is theory. The interesting thing. Theory. Yeah. The theory is that if you only put these cards in your deck, that you will learn to understand that is what makes up the fundamental building blocks of many limited decks. Not all of them, but many of them. And the key here is that you have to have an understanding that you're doing effectively like an exercise. You are pushing the boundaries of a certain type of a limited deck so that you can have a better understanding for what that actually looks like. And then you'll know when you can add on the other pieces. Because I've always said this about CABS theory, is that it is not the optimal way to play limited. You should have a few cards there's often powerful cards that don't directly affect the board that you actually do want. And it's totally okay to play those, cards like equipment or things like that. Or sometimes there's card draw spells, right? Oh, it draws me 3 cards. Like that's really, precognitive perception or something like that is a card that would not fit in CABS theory. But if you're playing blue, you should have it in your deck because it's really powerful. But when you sit down, sometimes you say, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to set all that other stuff aside and I'm just going to draft straight up CABS. So you want 17 to 18 creatures, something like that. The rest are removal spells or combat tricks, maybe 15 creatures, whatever. And you want a good curve. You're willing to play less exciting creatures and you're going to play, very likely 17 land deck. And it's insane how much better people do when they're used to just sort of randomly jamming,
just the 23 cards they like the most into their deck.
Yeah, because there's a really easy problem that you can fall into that CABS theory just obliterates, which is there's a card like you're like, oh, divination, this is a good card. I'll take it. I'll put it in my deck. Cool. All right. And then you're like, oh, here's another card. Sift. All right. I'll take that one. I'll put that in my deck. Cause like Marshall and Louise said that those cards are good. So yeah, I'll take that. That's cool. And then you're like, oh, this equipment, that's powerful. I'll play that. And you put that in your deck too. And if you held up each of these cards individually, Louise and I might say, yeah, it's a good card. That's playable for sure. Or even good. Like you want that card in your deck. But if you laid out your deck, you might have 11 creatures and 9 of these cards that don't do anything, or even 3 or 4. And the truth of the matter is that you should be ruthless about whether you put one of these cards in your deck. A great example from the set that's out right now is Wilderness Reclamation. And we had when Huey is on, we talked about it a little bit. And, my stance has been throughout the format that I think the card is really bad. Like I have still not really seen a great deck for it. And I have tried it in a Simic deck as well. And it did do a few things. It wasn't that it didn't do anything, but it did so little and it was inconsistent at doing the thing that it was doing that I decided, okay, here's the deal. There is a deck for this. Like I am convinced that there is a deck that would much prefer this over, an Axebane Beast or something like that. But it is going to come up very, very rarely. Almost never will you actually see that deck. And you'll see people on Arena and at the local store and on Magic Online just throw that card in their deck. They're just like, yeah, Wilderness Reclamation.
It's a powerful card and sees playing constructed.
Right. But what could go wrong? Right. And the problem is that for people like Luis and I, nuts and bolts spikes, people that are really trying to maximize win percentage and stuff, even having that one card is a major tax in my mind. It puts pressure on all my other cards. It doesn't get you out of situations when you fall behind. It rarely lets you win the game when you're ahead. It does have some like mid to late game application to let you kind of do some kind of brokenish stuff, but I'm not willing to pay that cost. And I would basically rather play Axebane Beast effectively every time. Because I've never found the bottleneck on mana to be the reason that I lose games with my Simic decks. That's not the problem that I face. So it's not really solving anything that I want. Although I have seen people send screenshots where they had like biogenic ooze and, a whole bunch of ways to like move counters and do all this stuff. And I was like, okay, like you're doing enough stuff to make it so that you're like kind of dominating this board thanks to Wilderness Reclamation. But again, that's just one example because when you adopt CABS 3 for a draft or two just to sort of be a palate cleanser, get yourself back to the basics, you're not playing any of that stuff. You're reducing that number to 0 so that every single card you draw is play it, I can block with it, I can attack with it, it makes my creature better or it kills your creature. And when you do that, it's very eye-opening. It really is. Even if you've been drafting for a while, you're just like, wow, like every single one of these cards, even if they're kind of junky, it's a 2/2 for 2 with no ability or minimal ability, stuff like that. You're like, wow, I'm just curving out. I'm playing stuff. I'm applying pressure to my opponent and I'm kind of making them have it. And what you'll realize is you pick up free wins. And your opponent effectively never gets to pick up free wins against you outside of like extreme mana scenarios. But you're picking up wins when your opponent stumbles on mana even just a little bit. And you're picking up wins when they go Wilderness Reclamation, go. And you're like, cool, take 6. Because all of your cards are immediately impacting the board and doing things. And this is a really valuable lesson because again, while it isn't perfectly optimal to draft like this all the time, this is a great baseline stance that a lot of the best limited players ever adopt as kind of like their go-to mode, and then they'll build up off of that. But if you don't know how to do it from the base, you can't build on it. So that's why we recommend trying.
And it's especially good when you're drafting formats you don't know. So that either means formats that are new and you haven't had a chance to draft, or a format like M19 where you either drafted it before and are going back into it kind of not remembering what's going on, or you didn't draft it before. Because M19, I don't think was that popular of a draft format.
It was medium, yeah.
Whatever. And the fact that it's now the ranked format on Arena means people are, lining up to draft it. Mm-hmm. So being able to kind of make a functional deck, it's funny. CABS reminds me of, a non-magic kind of saying, KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yep. Totally. This is the magic
there's a comma in between simple and stupid, by the way.
Yeah, it's self-referential, but but CABS is the magic version of that.
Yeah, it really is. And it's the sort of thing where, we've mentioned this before. When we first talked about it, I thought this was actually too simple to talk about, but it's not, because it's the sort of thing that without getting this reminder, I think a lot of people, ourselves included, kind of forget how much depth there is in drafting, and how much it's easy to get bogged down in unnecessary kind of like sideshows when you could just draft a good deck. Because one of the things about M19, what you earlier called it CABSy, is the synergy cards, the non-board affecting cards, and like the themes in this set are just not that prominent. You can draft a life gain deck, you can draft an artifact deck. These things exist, and there's some enablers for them. But if you just draft a deck with a good curve and a couple removal spells and a couple pump spells, you'll do just fine, more than fine. Whereas in some of the more complex sets, like if you did that in Dominaria, you would probably get smashed by some Mirari Conjecture, Lich's Mastery nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
So but I think like M19 it's a great format for this, and it's also great where we're not going to be drafting this for 3 months, but it is the format now for a lot of how people are relevantly interacting with Magic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's pretty strong in order to just look at it this way and realize that you don't have to like master every single thing about this to be pretty successful. But
yeah, another one is a Chaos Draft. It's really good for that. CABSing it up, and Chaos Draft is kind of the name of the game. I remember when I first started doing Chaos Drafts, especially when they came out on Magic Online, I thought it was going to be like all these crazy synergies crossing together, and I'd have to have this like matrix view of the formats and all this stuff. And it turns out you just take a bunch of like green and black creatures and some removal and turn them sideways. And that's kind of the way to will. That's why B. Wong liked it so much too. Because B. Wong, Brian, he was the previous co-host. If you haven't heard him,
I have heard of him.
I know you have. And he was a very, like he could draft any style, but he was very CABSy. He loved a 4/3, like just a 4/3 vanilla. He just loved turning those things sideways and pump spell and remove your guy, bang, hit you for 4. You can win so many games. I really do challenge anybody who's been drafting for a little while to just take a draft, to just go back and just stick to the full on CABS and try it in M19. It works totally fine. There's a couple of decks that are a little weird, but you'll win more. I firmly believe that if you're just sort of randomly drafting cards and like picking things that are on color and just doing it, that you will actually gain a lot by doing this. And like you said, why don't we get into the weeds here a little bit on M19? Just in case some of our listeners are like, okay, well, I want to play ranked, and I'm going to play on arena, so here we go, and they're going to dive in. So how would you describe M19 from like a big picture perspective? It was very kind of basic core set with some gold.
Well, it's like what a lot of the core sets are, which is very, very focused on the fundamentals. Cards that look like they'd be good and limited are good and limited. Creatures are good. Having a curve is good. Having removal is good. Like, there are some limited formats where, 2 mana 2/2 is just a trap and you're going to lose a ton of win percentage by putting it in your deck. Dominaria is one of those formats.
Mm-hmm.
I think 2 mana 3/2 is generally bad in Dominaria.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case in M19. Your kind of good curve of vanilla creatures is actually pretty solid. The build arounds and the themes in the set aren't so strong that you need to really go deep on them, even though sometimes it's going to come up. It's the sort of thing where there's some value added stuff where you're going to play a blue-white deck that has a couple things that care about artifacts, and there's a decent amount of good artifacts to play. And sometimes they'll line up and you'll get an extra card off your Scholar of Stars or what have you. And a lot of the times it won't line up exactly right. And, your cards will just be a little worse than average. It's not the same as you need to have 7 artifacts in your deck to play this affinity card, or 10 artifacts or 12 artifacts. And once you do, the card's busted. It's unplayable otherwise. It's more like, here's a card that's a 6 without an artifact and an 8 with an artifact.
Yeah, I remember that being true in a lot of scenarios in this set. There's just a lot of, I think we called them 1-2 punches, just little mini synergies, but not ones that, went across your entire deck. It was like I had
right. There's just cards that trigger off of life gain that you would rather have life gain in your deck to make them better. But if you don't, they're just serviceable cards. And it's not particularly complicated, but there are some definitely ways to get an edge rather than just opening the pack and just taking the best card. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things I wanted to review is kind of the best commons. For white, we've got Luminous Bonds, which is kind of a shoe-in for best common most of the time. You're talking about any set just because a 3-mana kind of unconditional removal is exactly what white wants.
Mm-hmm.
Blue is Essence Scatter.
Yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, the 2-mana counterspell is just, it's part of it is that blue tends not to have the best commons in the world. And then also Essence Scatter is just very efficient. And there's a lot of creatures with enter the battlefield effects in this set. One of the weird things about this set was there was a lot of like random cantrip creatures, like Sky Spanner, there was a Rock's Oracle, there was the Scholar of Stars, and just like a lot of other creatures that had enter the battlefield effects. So it is just kind of funny looking at how good Essence Scatter is compared to normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it ended up being quite strong. Funny enough, as you kind of work your way down the list, it's like exactly how you'd think core set would go for best common. It's like the black one is Lich's Caress, which is 3 BB for a removal spell. It's like, okay, I'm kind of picking up what they're putting down here. It's all kind of standard issue stuff.
Yeah, and then red is Electrify, which is 3 in a red, deal 4 at instant speed, which it is better than Shock in this format. There are some formats where you'd rather have Shock, like if you're looking at like original Zendikar, it wouldn't have been close. And even more recently, there have been formats like M19 where Shock would be much better than Electro, which actually was an M19, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yep. And then Boggart Brute, that 3-mana 3/2 menace, also pretty solid.
Yeah, that card's right up there with Electrify, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And then for green, Druid of the Cow, just having a ramp spell is pretty good because green is fairly themed around ramp in this set. So Druid of the Cow kind of does that very, very well.
Mm-hmm. I remember Druid of the Cow when we first saw it. We liked it a lot, and it ended up kind of holding its own, at least well enough. Although I do remember, I think it went down in value a little bit for us. Does that sound right to you?
No, I thought I think
the whole way through.
I think it was just the best. Not that it was like the best. It wasn't as good as some of the commons in other colors, but I do think it still was the best green common at the end of things.
Okay. What about the color pairs? Because they did take their time or take the design space here to make gold uncommons in each of the color pairs. I mean,
this has proven to be just like a pretty solid win for Magic set design in general, which is regardless of what's going on, you can almost always count on there being a gold card. For Ravnica sets, obviously it's different. There's just the 5 guilds, but like in non-Ravnica sets, a gold 2-color card at uncommon for every color pair, which tells you what that color pair is supposed to do. These like signpost cards that tell you, what's supposed to be going on. But that said, there was a hierarchy for the color pairs. So I think the 4 best that we had in our estimation were blue-black control. So just blue-black kind of like cards that, removal spells, cards that provide an advantage. Not a particularly CABSy deck, actually, because it actually does want a decent amount of card draw and just removal and doesn't care that much about a curve.
It was a little more value-based, yeah.
And then there's red-white tokens. So this is a red-white aggressive deck that is very CABSy and has a slight emphasis on going wide and pump spells that reward you for going wide. Heroic Reinforcements does stand out as the gold card there. You have black-white life gain, which is generally just a black-white control deck. It just happens to have life gain cards in it that give you a little bit of an extra bonus when they line up together.
Yeah, that was the biggest example of what we talked about before. It worked. Okay, cool. I'm doing something.
Right, like their uncommon is Regal Bloodlords. That's 3 white black, so 5 mana, 2/4 flyer, and then at the beginning of each end step, if you gain life, you make a 1/1 flyer. So a 5 mana 2/4 flyer is slightly below rate, but then you add even one trigger to this, it becomes above rate.
Yep.
It's exactly what we're talking about. It's like a 5 that becomes a 7 or 8 when you gain some life. And if you're getting every turn, this is like a 9.
Yeah. And going back to blue-black, the signpost uncommon for that was Psychic Symbiont.
Yeah, the 6 mana, 3/3 flying, and they discard a card and you draw a card.
Yeah, when it ETBs. Really, really good card too. Yeah, and you mentioned Heroic Reinforcements. That card was absurd as well.
So, and then red-green ramp is the other one. Their gold card's Draconic Disciple. So 1 red-green 2/2. You taps for mana of any color, then you can pay 7 and sacrifice it to make a 5/5 flying dragon.
Yep. And
this deck is really trying to skip the 2-drop slot, with Druid of the Cow being the exception because it's a ramp spell, and go to 4 or 5 drops. Some of the underrated cards, by the way, in the set were Thornhide Wolves.
Thornhide Wolves, your boy. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 mana 4/5 was really good. Oh, that reminds me that in the black-white deck and in black control decks in general, Vampire Neonate with a 1 mana 0/3 that you can pay 2 and tap, drain your opponent for 1. Actually pretty good.
Yep.
So
that ended up being a lot more playable than we thought.
That was another hidden gem there. And Red-Green Ramp's just a really solid deck. If you got lucky enough to open the rare Sarkhan's Unsealing, that card was a beating. Every time you played a creature with a power 4 or greater, you got to nug anything for 4. And then when you play a creature power 7 or greater, you got to nug their whole team for 4.
Oh my God, I forgot about that card. That ended up being just an absurd build around, a true rare level,
Yeah. So then I think there's a bit of a gap after those 4 decks. And then you've got blue-red spells. So Enigma Drake being the highlight uncommon. This is a 3 mana 0/4 flyer, but gets +1 power for each spell in your graveyard.
Yeah, you were the only player that wanted those. That was kind of the part. Nobody tried to splash them on you if they were open.
And there was various cantrips and ways to fill your graveyard with spells and cards that rewarded you for spells. But it ended up being that the payoffs weren't quite good enough, and the deck did a little bit too much dirtling around. So you would end up in a spot where your opponent who curved out was often ahead of you.
Yeah, remember Gutter Snipe was also in the set.
Yeah, and I think that particular deck was a little bit confused, where it had these red aggressive spell payoffs, and then divination sift type effects, and that's just not a good way to fight your opponent.
Right.
It's just, you don't want this combination.
You're just too off plan by doing one or the other. Yeah.
And then you had blue-white artifacts, which really the blue-white deck was fine without the artifact theme, and a blue-white flyers deck did perform. But if you could get the artifact theme, there was a couple blue and white cards at all rarities that rewarded you for having artifacts, and then a couple, there's some common artifacts. There's cards like Aviation Pioneer in blue. There's 2 new blue, 1/2, and makes a 1/1 flying Thopter.
Mm-hmm. And so, remember Scholar of the Stars, right off, it was a 3 into a 4 that you could get the card off of that. Yeah.
I still just didn't think this deck was particularly great, just because it was a little light on actual payoffs where, Scholar of the Stars, a 4 mana 3/2 draw card is not busted. And a 4 mana 3/2 where you don't draw a card is quite bad. So this is a 3 that becomes a 6.
Yeah.
That's not the ratio I really want.
It was actually ended up being a little difficult to get the artifacts in, right? Because they had a few that you could play. Do you remember Fountain of Renewal?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was 1 mana for an artifact, and it was uncommon, and you gained life at the beginning of your upkeep. And
I already said I remembered it. You don't need to tell me what it is.
You could pay 3 and sack it to draw a card. So it gave you an artifact just sort of sitting there, and then remember Meteor Golem?
Yep, the 7 mana 3/3 that nugs any non-land permanent.
Exactly. Opponent controls, and then the absolute peak, right? Sky Scanner. We just love this card. 3 mana, 1/1 flyer. When ETBs, you draw a card. Those cards were great. And then there was a couple other Diamond Mare and Gargoyle Sentinel, but there was a lot that Field Creepers in this set. 2 mana, 2/1, just artifact creature, but not really a card you wanted to run. Oh, remember Gearsmith Guardian? It's all coming back to me now, baby. 5 mana, 3/5. Yeah.
Gets +2/+0 as long as you have a blue creature. So
which is weird. It reversed it on us, but
yeah. And there were an actual amount of artifacts in the set, but I just the payoffs weren't so good that you end up you end up in a spot where you really feel rewarded for that.
Yeah.
And then going down further, you have blue green, green white, red black, and black green, and these were the bottom tier of color pairs with not that solid of a theme is part of it, and just like there's no real reason to combine these two colors other than if both colors, like how it works is if both colors are open, just draft those two colors, totally fine. But when we're talking about color pairs that perform better than average, these do not. Like blue green had Skyrider Patrol, which is a great card, a 4-mana 2/3 flying, and then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can pay a blue and a green to give one of your creatures ++1 in flying. ++1 counter and flying until end of turn.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a great card. You'd often just take that card, but the rest of the blue and green cards didn't work that well together. You had these like weird blue artifact cards combined with just giant green creatures and then card draw spells, and it's just not particularly synergistic.
Yeah, I remember those type of decks ended up relying really heavily on just raw power level. It was like, how many good uncommons do you have? Did you open a sweet rare? We're not talking about nuanced stuff here.
Yeah, and then like green-white was presumably an auras deck with Satyr Enchanter giving you, letting you draw a card whenever you cast an enchantment spell.
I think that was just the worst deck in the format. Like,
it
literally
just never happened.
Yeah.
And then, and green and white aren't very complementary in terms of what those colors bring to the table. So what white has luminous bonds, green has basically no removal, and then white has a kind of a go wide or artifact theme, and then green has big creatures. So
it's like, where are we going with this? Yeah.
Yeah. And then green black had a really good gold card, Poison Tip Archer. So 2 green black for a 2/3 reach death touch, and whenever any other creature dies, your opponent loses a life. So that card is great. You take that card, but then green black again just didn't combine all that well together.
It's funny because the Poison Tip Archer got played in decks having blue in them, I think much more than just straight green black. Like everybody sniped that card because it's such a great defensive card. It just basically demands removal, or else even their better creatures can't attack into it. Since it has reach and death touch, it's just like, I'm going to trade this thing off for something of yours. Attack at any point.
Yeah. And then you had red black, which was nominally a sacrifice themed deck with like the Brawl menacing or Brawl Bash Ogre, 4-mana 3/3 menace. Then whenever it attacks, you can sack another creature to give it +2/+2. But it's kind of unfortunate because I love the red black sacrifice deck when it works, and it feels like M19 was like the latest at the time in a long string of sets that just kind of tempted you by thinking it might be there, and then it just wasn't there. Yes, Active Treason was a common, but there just weren't enough good sack rewards and sack outlets. Mm-hmm. So it just didn't quite get there. And, red black sacrifice wasn't really a deck. Red and black do actually complement each other fairly well because they both just have a lot of good removal spells and they have reasonable creatures in this set. So I don't think red black was an intrinsically bad combination. It just wasn't getting much out of the synergy part.
Yeah. So, this set wasn't that bad.
Yeah. It wasn't a 50 draft format, It was it was closer to like a 15 draft format.
Yeah, it was it was really straightforward. That was the knock on it. It was just that it was like, here's the stuff, and you're like, okay, oh, well, that's exactly what this set does.
And a lot of the gameplay, like, one of the things that's good about formats like this is you don't need to know a lot of what's going on in order to be successful or feel like you're competing in it. But it also just felt like a lot of the gameplay just during the games wasn't that entrancing. There just, there wasn't like a lot of complicated stuff going on during the draft format or during the draft part or just on board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not an all-timer, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I don't know. I drafted it and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm starting to remember this stuff, and it was fine. It's like probably the most core set-y of all core set drafts. It feels exactly like a core set should feel, which is a little on the boring side, I guess, compared to, crazy gold.
It's a good on-ramp to other draft formats. And, even though I would rather the most recent format just be the ranked format for Arena, I think the fact that M19 is there, it does likely make draft less intimidating and easier to get into for people who are just trying to dip their toes in.
By the way, like rhetorically, I know you don't know the answer to this, but why? Like, what is going on?
I don't know the answer to that.
Like, I turn it on, I go into Arena, and it's like, okay, sweet, I can do best of 3, but you know what? We're recording this on Thursday, April 4th. It's like, hey, maybe I should go for a rank. Like, I had Mythic not this last season, but the prior season. And then this season I turned it on and it was Rivals, which is another okay format. Like not that I hate it, but I don't really love it. And I'm like, well, I want to draft Ravnica Allegiance. So I'm going to do that. And then I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to look up when Rivals is going to go away because it'd probably only be here for a week or something. It was there for like ever, for most of the format. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm just not going to go for Mythic this season because I really just want to play Ravnica Allegiance. It's the new set. Like that's what I'm supposed to be playing. And then it flipped over and I thought, okay, now I'm going to hit the ground running with Ravnica Allegiance. And then when War of the Spark comes out, if that becomes the rank thing, then I'll try to do Mythic again because that was kind of fun doing that. And then it's M19. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't want to draft M19. I want to draft at least Ravnica Allegiance. I'm still enjoying that. I'll probably just dust it off and do it anyway just because why not? But like, it does feel a little weird just sort of conceptually. It's like, I don't really understand what the if I'm like, you're kind of the incentives are like, care about this, do this, but then, and show us how good you are. And then it's like, but you just draft some obscure, slightly older format. So anyway, I just don't really get that.
Neither do I.
It's just a little weird, right? You want to talk about our preview card?
Yeah, let's do it
before we take off. So we put it up on online the day after we recorded the last week's show, and we couldn't quite talk about it then. But we did get a preview card for War of the Spark. Thank you, Wizards, for that. It is called Crush Descent, which is a sweet name. And I don't know, it's an okay card. It's 3 and a blue for an instant. It's common, and it says counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. So from this point, I'm like, well, that sucks, right? It's a 4 mana quench. Like, ugh. Not what I want to be doing. It does get better though. And this is really interesting to sort of dive into how much better does it have to be to play a card with 4 mana quench as its main text. So it has amass 2. And the way this works is you put 2 +1/+1 counters on an army you control, which is like a type of token. If you don't control one, you create a 0/0 black army creature token first, and then you put the counters on token. Black zombie army token.
I actually like this card. Not that I think it's great, but it's going to lead to a lot of sweet gameplay situations because your opponent, especially if they've already seen this card, is just not going to want to run a card into it. Mm-hmm. So you're just going to threaten them and scare them from casting cards. Note that you do have to have a spell to cast this card. You can't just cast this end of turn. You would like to get the token or whatever. You actually do need to target a spell, but you can also target one of their spells even if they can pay for it if you just do want that 2/2.
And that is really cool, right? Because there's almost never a time when you're encouraged to cast any type of counter spell when it won't actually counter the thing. But that is a legitimate strategic decision that you're just like, you have the 2 mana to pay, but I just need the 2/2. So
what'll happen, I think, is when you like leave mana up for this and then they just play a cheap spell instead, probably playing around this, and you just come to the conclusion, I'm going to be too far behind if I don't cast this card because 4 mana is such a big ask. I don't think this card is super powerful. When you counter a spell, it's very good, right? If you have it on turn 4 and they walk into it, you get a 2/2 and you counter a spell, or you make your
it's a 2 for 1.
Yeah, or you make your 1/1 into like a 3/3. But as far as cards go, this isn't going to be one of the best commons.
No, and I mean, I think that there's a decent chance that it's not really playable, right? I mean, look, that is a steep tax. Crush Descent is 4 mana, very conditional counterspell here. I plan on playing against players who are good, right? Like I build my decks and I make my plays assuming that my opponent is good. And Crush Descent is the type of card that is so easy to telegraph. Like you just pass, I don't have anything. It's fine. Go ahead, cast your spell. And they're just like, what? Go, And if you don't have a backup plan, if you don't have anything to point this at or some other way to spend your mana, and you could have spent your mana, it kind of starts to become a disaster pretty quickly. If you're just trying to like infinitely leave up your quench, your 4 mana quench or whatever. So yeah, I am curious to see where it fits in. The big question is the army thing as well. Like how good is the mass 2? because that is legit. I mean, getting a 2/2 or adding 2 counters to some other army token or whatever is that's worth something. You know, the 2/2 is worth roughly a card, though maybe not a 4-mana card. But the times when you do get them is an insane blowout. I think the thing that I'm going to look for is what are the other viable mana sinks that I could have? Like,
right.
Great example.
If there's like a 4-mana draw 2 cards.
Yeah.
Then
that's like what's it called? Chemist's Insight.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like if that was in this set, then it's like now you have a real viable plan here because the upside on Crush Descent is very high. But if you can't spend that mana, it's going to be really, really annoying. So. Yeah, so that's our card. We'll talk about it more, and we'll talk about Amass more as well for the Rules and Mechanics show, which is going to come up not next week, but the week after that, because we've got the Sunset show for Ravnica Allegiance, and I'm really looking forward to that because the Sunset show, Ravnica Allegiance ended up being a format that I drafted a heck of a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's better than Guilds.
I agree.
Yeah, and that says a lot because we ended up sort of like hands in the air, like I really like Guilds, I guess. Like I still don't really know how that ended up happening because the ingredients weren't there, but it became its own new thing once everything was mixed together.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to do a set review for War of the Spark?
I do. Yeah, I definitely think we're going to do. Dude, the set review is going to be absurd for that set too. Like we've already got people tweeting at us like, this looks like a difficult one to grade because we have some of the answers, by the way. Remember when we did our show a few weeks ago where we were speculating about, what could the Planeswalkers look like and stuff? Well, we now know that some of the stuff that we discussed is the way that they went, which is there are single activation Planeswalkers. There's down only Planeswalkers, which we talked about. And there's Planeswalkers that are uncommon and rare and mythic rare as well. So kind of all that happened. And then the thing that I've noticed the most that I'm kind of curious to talk about and get your take on and stuff when the time's right are the static abilities on Planeswalkers. Like they kind of became like a hybrid of an enchantment that you can attack, but also has like some type of ability that you can use once or twice or something like that. But it has this ability that as long as it's on the battlefield, it's not useless. It's not like minus, and then it just sits there and can't ever do anything again. And that to me is a really cool design space because then you actually still have to choose later on, well, do I actually want to attack this Planeswalker or not? And we talked about that a lot too. And so, of course, there's going to be a ton of that. But that's still a little ways off. War of the Spark, they have been pushing out the previews and stuff, but it actually doesn't come out for another 3 weeks. So, yeah, we're going to be doing our normal build up to that to make sure that you have all the information you could ever want before that pre-release happens. And that you can set yourself up to maybe win some packs, something like that when the time comes. All right, Luis, you ready to wrap this thing?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's call it a show and get Luis safely tucked away in his bed. It has gotten a little bit late here. First things first, if you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. We're on everything. I have an Instagram now. Actually, I've had it for a while, but I've actually been using it a little bit. And then Twitter, and we have a Facebook page. You can find links to basically all this stuff on lrcast.com. I want to thank our sponsor once again, channelfireball.com. Make sure that you pre-order War of the Spark right now. If you're going to get a box, get in there, get it pre-ordered, and then boom, they're going to send it to you right away. And if you're kind of looking at your wallet and going, I really would like a War of the Spark box so that I can have a draft or two with my friends, but a little thin on money this week. Well, what you can do is take a look and see if you have any rares laying around, maybe an old box of rares or some of the rares from the previous drafts that you've done. They actually add up really quickly because Channel Fireball will give you 30% bonus, a trade-in bonus, if you want to trade it in for store credit that you could use on stuff like a box of War of the Spark or whatever. And even if it's not going to pay for the whole thing, even just, taking out 10, 15, 20 bucks of it for some rares that you probably wouldn't use anyway, or that are just going to lose their value when they rotate. Take advantage of this stuff. This is how it works. Magic's an expensive hobby. If you want to play online and real life, maintain a collection, keep up on all the new sets, it's going to cost you some bucks. And this is one of the ways that you can kind of mitigate that is by taking advantage of that 30% trade-in bonus, or you can just get cash if you want. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Next week is the Sunset show for Ravnica Allegiance, and I think we're going to give Luis the soundboard again.
Sounds like a plan to me.
Mm-hmm.
So Well, one of the things that happened during the show made me realize how smart our brains are. When we're
like mine and yours specifically, or human beings in general?
Human beings, I wouldn't say yours specifically.
I tried to lump myself in with you.
So basically, when we're done with some knowledge, it jettisons it as quickly as possible. What I mean is when we decided, hey, let's go back and look at M19, neither of us could even remember what M19 was or name a single card.
No. Which is incredible because we did archetype breakdown, set reviews, multiple episodes about this.
And it reminds me of taking like finals in school where you just like cram all this information in, go to the test, regurgitate it, and then afterwards it's just like vanishes into the ether.
It's weird.
Well, it shows me how good your brain is at determining you do not need this and just getting rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It also determines how important it is to, repetition in terms of learning things, like getting into your long-term memory. And in the case of this, I actually found that once we started talking about it, I remembered all the stuff about M19 because it was still there. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't.
The floodgates did happen, but it was in some other part of my brain. Right?
It wasn't easy to access. Whereas at this point, if you tried to test me on linear algebra or, whatever class I took in college,
gone.
I just no outs. I would have no chance. But I mean, this was also a little more recent. It's just funny that the knowledge you don't immediately need and then you've used and then you've moved on from, our minds are very good at either hiding them in the case of this M19 stuff, kind of submerging them where it takes a little bit for us to access them, or just getting rid of it entirely because you only have so much space. You got to clear out the hard drive.
Yeah, especially when it's M19.
Yeah, well, especially then, yeah.
That can go away, thank you. I can still tell you how to draft Rise of the Eldrazi, and that was 10 years ago. Somehow. It's
because those things we've thought about a lot more, talked about a lot more, maybe done flashback drafts or sought out the opportunity to draft them. Whereas, when is the last time you thought about Origins? You just didn't.
I just see Topin Freeblade
or Theros draft. It's just these just aren't even a thing. So. Yeah. I thought it was kind of amusing, and it made me realize how much Magic sets were kind of like finals, where after the Sunset show and the set being offline, we just kind of wash our hands of it and move on to the next.
All right, listeners, don't jettison anything you've ever learned on LR that goes in the special briefing.